That's kind of where I'm leaning right now through step 2. Let's go to step 3. Step 3 is to read the first sentence of each body paragraph. And this will help us get a much better understanding of the source's main idea in the event that the source is taken from a larger work or doesn't have a proper introduction or conclusion, which is what I talked about earlier. Step 3 is kind of to make up for that. It allows us to get an idea of what goes on in the middle of the paragraph, or in the middle of the source, and that can kind of fill in the gaps that might be missing if we don't have a typical introduction and conclusion. So let's do that. Let's read the first sentence of each of our body paragraphs. A typical large wind turbine can generate up to 1.8 MW, million watts, of electricity, or 5.2 million kilowatt hours annually under ideal conditions, enough to power nearly 600 households. But there are downsides too. Potential disadvantages aside, the United States has a good number of wind turbines installed, totaling more than 9,000 million watts of generating capacity in 2006. Okay, so it definitely seems like the entire focus of this source is about energy. It's all about how much energy these wind turbines are able to produce, and it seems to be conveying the idea that wind turbines are capable of producing a lot of electricity. It does have one paragraph that addresses downsides. However, the next paragraph says potential disadvantages aside, and then goes on to talk about how wind turbines are kind of useful in generating electricity again. So it seems like the main idea doesn't deal with the downsides. The main idea deals with the fact that wind turbines can produce lots of electricity. And then step 4. Using the information that we've gathered by all of our previous steps, now we want to determine the main idea and the position. We've been doing this as we go, right? But once we've read all these, that's when we want to make our final decision. And we're going to write a quick note on the page. And the reason we're going to do that is so that once we're done with this and we start writing and we're looking for information, we can kind of have that reminder to ourselves. Okay, this is one that I did need. This is a source that I didn't need, right? This one supports my position. This one supports the other position. So we're going to write down a quick note and position, and then we're going to repeat this for all of the other sources. Ideally, once we practice this quite a bit, I think we could do this in 90 seconds or less. It's not a whole lot of reading. It's just reading the box, the italics, first and last paragraph, first sentence of the remaining paragraphs, and then determining 2 things, right? I don't think this will take 15 minutes. I think we can use some of that reading time to actually work on our writing a little bit. So yeah, once we've done our reading, we want to determine that main idea and position. And there is a note here, and this deals a little bit with what I mentioned earlier about why it's so important to read the prompt and identify what sort of position we're being asked to take. Some prompts have 2 very clear positions that are in direct contrast with each other, right? That was the example I gave earlier where, it's not saying are wind turbines good or are wind turbines bad, right? That would be an example of something that has 2 very clear positions in direct contrast. They're either good or bad. It's black and white. You're either writing out position A or position B, right? Some prompts have more gray areas, like this one, for example. And you kind of have the option to choose between a variety of positions, right? It's not that, based on the prompt, we couldn't say, okay, I'm either saying that the most important factor is this thing or it's that thing, right? There's a million different things that could be the most important factor. And sometimes the sources might be about more specific things, and your position has to be a little bit more general, that encompasses multiple of the more specific things. So for example, if we have a source that talks about how wind turbines are ugly, and then a source that talks about how wind turbines, disrupt people's sight lines, and then one about how people think wind turbines are annoying, then maybe we could group all of those together, and then our position could be something like, the most important factor is what the local people think about wind turbines. Right? we have three more specific factors, but they all kind of share this idea that it's about people's opinion of them, or how it impacts the people that live nearby, for example. And that's kind of what we have in this one, right? We're going to have maybe some more specific things in the sources, and we need to find some general positions that encompass multiple of the more specific positions. Obviously, it's easier if we have a more black and white one, where it's either position A, position B, there's nothing else. But sometimes that's not the case. So if we wanted to write a quick note about the main idea of position, main idea and position of source B, what could we write? We already talked about this as we went, but go ahead. I mean, I've kind of already given an answer, but take a second, pause. You can go back in the video to get back to it if you need. Actually, I'll just go right back to it for you. Yeah, give this a second. We've already read it, shouldn't take too long, and try to figure out what your main idea and position would be here. All right, so I think, as we already talked about, the main idea has something to do with the fact that wind turbines produce lots of energy, and the position would also have something to do with energy. Something to do with energy production being the most important factor, or how much energy a wind farm is able to produce being the most important factor. Something related to energy being really important, and energy production being really important. Let's try practicing on a source we haven't looked at all yet. Same prompt. All of these, I shouldn't say all of these, most of these sources that we look with are from the same prompt. This is also still the wind turbine prompt. Go ahead, use this 4-step process, and identify the main idea and position of this source. Okay, so I'm assuming you're done now, you've unpaused. I am going to go through this, and we'll see if we came up with the same or similar main idea and position, right? We don't have to be exactly the same, but we should be on the same page. So it tells us that this source is Wind Turbines, A Different Breed of Noise by Nate Seltenrich, maybe. And it's from Environmental Health Perspectives. The following is excerpted from an article in a peer-reviewed journal published by a federally funded research institute. The numbered notes refer to source information that has been omitted from this excerpt for length. All right, so that's step 1. Step 2, we're going to read the first and last paragraphs. Large-scale wind turbines are a relatively recent innovation, so the body of peer-reviewed research addressing the potential impacts of their unique brand of sound is sparse and particularly unsettled. Anecdotal evidence strongly suggests a connection between turbines and a constellation of symptoms including nausea, vertigo, blurred vision, unsteady movement, and difficulty reading, remembering, and thinking. Now we'll go to the last paragraph. Third, wind turbines generate lower frequencies of sound than traffic. These lower frequencies tend to be judged as more annoying than higher frequencies and more likely to travel through walls and windows. Infrasound, or sound frequency lower than 20 Hz, inaudible to the human ear, has been associated in some studies with symptoms including fatigue, sleeplessness, and irritability, as well as with changes to the physiology of the inner ear that have poorly understood implications. Okay, and now the first sentence of each of our remaining paragraphs. The polarizing issue of wind turbine noise is often framed one of two ways. Turbines are either harmless, or they tend to have powerful adverse effects, especially for sensitive individuals. Multiple recent studies, including one co-authored by Daniel Shepherd, senior lecturer at New Zealand's Auckland University of Technology, have demonstrated that sleep interference gets worse the nearer residents are to turbines. In another recent study, Shepherd made a case for approaching the debate from a social or humanistic standpoint, taking perceived effects seriously, even if the potential mechanisms through which they occur remain unclear. First is that turbine noise, that is, the acrodynamic noise produced by air moving around the spinning blades as opposed to any mechanical noise from the motor itself, is often deemed more annoying than the hum or roar of transportation noise because of its repetitive nature and high variability in both level and quality, from swoosh to thump to silence, all modulated by wind speed and direction. In addition, unlike vehicle traffic, which tends to get quieter after dark, turbines can sound louder overnight. Okay. So, one quick note before I get to the main idea and position here. This source is kind of annoying because it has lots of short paragraphs, right? It has a whole lot of paragraphs, and most of them are only like 2 sentences long. If you come across a source like this and you feel like you already have a really good idea of the main idea and position, as you're kind of finishing up step 3, you can stop. You can skip ahead to step 4. I felt like after I read the first sentence of maybe this one and this one, I already kind of knew what the main idea and position were. And I didn't really need to read the first sentences of these. So you can do that. You can save yourself a little bit of time and skip maybe the second half of step 3 if you already have a really strong idea. And I do. I have a really strong idea here. The main idea to me is something about how wind turbines can cause negative health effects on people that live nearby. And the most important factor, right, the position that it would support would either be something related to the health concerns that it can cause, or something related to noise, or something related to whether or not people live nearby. Something along those lines, right? The most important factor has something to do with the way it affects people nearby. So hopefully you came up with something similar. Again, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but there's not a whole lot of flexibility here, right? Obviously, it's not something to do with energy like the first one we looked at. It's definitely related to the noise, health effects, and the way that it affects people. So not all sources are going to be like passages like this. In fact, at least one of the sources will be visual rather than written. Sometimes you'll have more than one that's visual, sometimes you'll only have one, but it's a guarantee that you will have at least one visual source. And visual sources can include charts, graphs, images, like images could be like photographs, or it could be something that's drawn or something that's painted, cartoons. I've seen calendars. It could be essentially anything that's not just a written passage. Anything that relies on you to kind of look at something rather than just reading something. The goal is the same, right? We still want to identify the main idea and the position, but because we're not really dealing with words, the process is slightly different. So let's talk about charts and graphs first, and then we'll talk about other types of visual sources. So for charts and graphs, step 1's the same. All sources, regardless of what type of source it is, will have a box and will have italics. So we're still going to read those first. All charts and graphs should have titles and axes, and some of them will have keys. So step 2, instead of reading the first and last paragraph, we're going to read the titles, axes, and keys. These will give us a really solid understanding of what the chart or graph is measuring, right? The same way reading an introductory paragraph or a conclusion would give us a solid idea of the topic. Reading the title and reading the axes and the boxes will also give us a really good idea of the topic. And you can see that the titles and axes I have kind of put in red rectangles here. Step 3 is to quickly look at the data for simple, obvious trends. We don't want to spend a lot of time examining the data, but quick things, right? Something that's immediately apparent to us, that jumps out right away. And then step 4 is also the same. Use this information to identify the main idea and position. So I'm going to have you guys try this out right here. The reason I haven't talked really about what source F says yet is because I want you guys to do this for practice. Try this 4-step method on here. Come up with a main idea and position. This is for the same prompt about the wind turbines. And then unpause when you're done, and I will walk through it. Okay. Ranimala is the author. What is the most efficient source of electricity? From the Wall Street Journal. The following is excerpted from a blog on a news site that examines the mathematics behind common events. Okay, so we're talking about an efficient source of electricity. Right away, that's really, really important, right? It gives us a lot of information. We're talking about efficiency and what the most efficient way to generate electricity is. And we actually have, this source has 2 different graphs here. So we'll look at the first one first. The title is Percentage of Energy Input Retained When Converting Fuel to Electricity. Our axis tells us that we go from least efficient to most efficient. And so I guess we'll do step 3 for this one first, and then we'll do step 2 and 3 for the second one. Step 3, if we look for simple trends in the data, we can see that wind energy is the most efficient by a lot. And coal, oil, and natural gas seem to be the least efficient, with biomass, solar, nuclear, hydro, and geothermal being in the middle. So those are the simple trends. Now let's look at the second one. The title, cost to produce 1 million, I'm assuming that's 1 million milliwatt hours? I don't know. Cost to produce one something of electricity in 2009. It's the cost to produce a certain amount of electricity. So we're dealing with price now. And if we look at this, we can see that natural gas is our cheapest, solar is by far the most expensive, and then hydro, coal, wind, geothermal, biomass, nuclear, and petroleum are in the middle here. Okay, so now that we have this information, what is the main idea and what position does it support? Well, I think the main idea here would be something along the lines of wind energy being by far the most efficient method of generating electricity, while being relatively inexpensive, or being, similarly expensive to other types of electricity. That's kind of the main idea that I found here. We know the prompt deals with wind energy, right? So we know that's going to be really important here. So we know, the main idea has something to do with that. And the fact that it's by far the most efficient here seems to me that this is trying to tell us how efficient it is compared to how sort of inexpensive it is. And then as far as the position, what position might this data support? I think the position could be something about efficiency or cost being the most important, or efficiency relative to cost being the most important. That's all we get here, right? So it has to be something with either efficiency or cost. So I'm going to say the position that it supports is that efficiency relative to cost, or the amount of electricity it is able to produce relative to cost, is the most important factor. Which sort of fits with that first source we looked at, right? Source B here was all about how much energy it's able to produce. This is also about how much energy it's able to produce, and it just throws cost into the equation as well. So already I'm starting to kind of group sources together, right? I know that source F and source B probably support the same position. All right. I was about to ask if anyone had any questions, but can't really do that. Images, cartoons, and other visual sources. Step 1's the same. As I talked about earlier, all sources have those. Step 2, if the image has words, read the words. In cartoons, you're usually going to have words, not always. Other types of sources, again, the calendar I've seen had some words on it. If there are words, read the words. If there are no words, skip to step 3. And step 3 is kind of open-ended. If the image does not have words or has very few words, try to figure out what the image is depicting and why. Also think about how the image may be relevant to the prompt. Think about what the prompt is asking you to do and how the image might be related to the question that the prompt is asking. And then step 4 is also the same. Identify the main idea, identify the position. So if we look at this cartoon, right, this cartoon is not from the wind turbine source. I just wanted to give an example. It is Bizarro by Francesco Marciuliano. The following cartoon was published in a nationally syndicated comic strip. Having defeated the wolf, the 3 little pigs lose their house to a greater foe. What the heck's eminent domain? What the heck's a Walmart, right? Those words tell us a lot about what's going on here. Now, I don't know what the prompt was for this one, but we know it has something to deal with people losing their homes or their land. It's comparing eminent domain to Walmart, right? So eminent domain being the government taking your land, to Walmart presumably being a corporation taking over the land. So the main idea has something to do with that, right? We get that from the words here. But if we don't have words, we need to use our imagination a little bit more. So here is a source from the wind turbine prompt. It's just a photograph. We have the box, we have the italics, but we don't have any words here. So go ahead and give this a shot. What is the potential main idea and position for this source? How might this image factor into a discussion about the most important factors that an individual or agency should consider when deciding whether to establish a wind farm? Take as much time as you need with this. It is difficult, right? Because it's just a photograph. Think about what a main idea could be and what a position relative to the prompt could be. What does this photograph tell us, right? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. What 1,000 words is this trying to tell us? Take as much time as you need. Unpause when you're done. Okay. So it tells us that this photograph is aptly named Wind Turbines. It was taken by Joshua Winchell for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Digital Library. And then the italics tell us the same thing. The photograph below is taken for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. What could this photograph be trying to tell us? What could the main idea of this image be? I think there's a couple different directions you could go. I think you could say that the main idea is that wind turbines take up a lot of space, right? The turbines seem to be taking up a lot of space here. I think your main idea could be that wind turbines are ugly. That is subjective, obviously, but I think people could look at this image and could use this image to support an argument that wind turbines are ugly. I think you could say that the main idea here is that wind turbines are disrupting the natural habitat. I think kind of any of those could be the main idea of this photograph. Let me just see if I had any other potential ones written down. Wind turbines take up a lot of space. That could be another main idea here. Or that you need a lot of wind turbines in order to generate enough electricity. That could be another main idea. And that's kind of what's so great about visual sources, right? It's hard to figure them out, but because they are so flexible, you could use them to support different positions. These are all similar positions, right? But because it's just an image, you can kind of use the image the way that you want to use the image, right? There's no wrong answer here. I mean, I guess, you couldn't really use this to support the position that, this image is telling us that wind turbines produce lots of electricity, right? Because that's something that's quantitative, and we can't tell that from this image. But any of those things I mentioned, this could support that idea. So anything along those lines could work. And as far as position here, I wrote down that the most important factor is the appearance of wind turbines, but it could also be the amount of space that you have available. That could be your most important factor. Your most important factor could be, the way that it disrupts natural landscapes, something along those lines. Again, right, it's flexible. So you could you can't completely do a 180 with it, but you can kind of bend it to fit what you want it to fit.